everybody. I'm Anthony Gonzalez, and I'm the program coordinator for the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery. I want to welcome you all today to our webinar titled Supporting College Students, a Focus on Substance Use Policy Violators and Mandated Interventions. Joining me today is Dr. Benjamin Montemayor. Before we get started with today's content, I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides I'd like to review. Here on the screen should look somewhat familiar as we are in the Zoom webinar format. We do welcome your questions at any time for our presenter, but we will be holding them till the very end. We do ask that you utilize the Q&A feature for your questions. We do have the chat enabled, so please feel free to introduce yourself, share reflections and resources as it relates to today's content. But for those specific questions for our presenter, please utilize the Q&A feature. Additionally, if you have any issues with your audio or turning on the captioning, you should be able to set that up through your bottom dashboard. But if you have any issues, please send me a chat and I will hopefully help be able to get that set up. Additionally, we encourage everybody to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. You can learn more about the different membership tiers and the benefits that go along with them by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. We also have quite a few upcoming events that we're excited to share with everybody. Happening next week is the 2023 Cannabis Symposium taking place on December 7th. Registration is open and you can learn more about the different sessions by visiting our website. We also have a December water cooler chat taking place on the 12th and will be focused on health and wellness, a university and fraternity and sorority conversation. We also have a free webinar taking place at the end of January and is titled Understanding Passion for Substance Use Among College Students with and Without Cannabis Use Disorder. And we have our 2024 national meeting taking place here in Columbus, Ohio. We'll also have a virtual component going on simultaneously and will be taking place at the end of July and the beginning of August. Stay tuned as we will be announcing the call for proposal in the coming weeks. And with that, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to our presenter today, Dr. Benjamin Montemayor, Assistant Professor in the Department of Health Behavior at Texas A&M University School of Public Health. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Montemayor, and it's my pleasure turning it over to you at this time.
Thanks, Anthony. Give me one sec as I start to share my screen. Okay, thank you all for having me. Again, Anthony read through my title, read through my accolades, I suppose. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into the next slide. But I want to thank them for the opportunity to present this. I think I reached out probably in August, September, inquiring as to what exactly the center was, as I saw that they were starting to promote some of my research articles. And I was like, this is wonderful. Someone's pushing this and I don't have to self-promote myself. And I really appreciated that. So I reached out, we had a meeting, and about a month or two later, Anthony reached out to me with sort of this niche presentation over a very specific subpopulation of college students. So thank you all to Anthony and the rest of the Higher Education Center for AOD, Misuse Prevention and Recovery. It's really appreciated, and I look forward to kind of interacting with you all more as we move on, and even within the national conference. So a little bit of the overview is we're going to go through a brief background. We're going to go through some of my study findings that I recently published and was kind of the bulk of how I got into what this research area is, and this programmatic area. And if I look down to my right, often it's because my dog is crated currently, and she's not used to being crated at this time, nor having me home at this time. So I appreciate everyone's patience as I kind of navigate taking care of a dog while I'm also doing this. And then we're going to go through some ongoing research that I currently have going on here at A&M, where I'm employed, some implications, and then, of course, questions at the end. And I think Anthony have discussed sort of having this question after. If you type them in the chat, I may not see them directly, but I will get to them as soon as we can, as soon as the semester, or as soon as the presentation's over. So this is sort of my why. Researchers tend to have often have personal reasons for what they research and why they research something. That's not lost on me. So it's also kind of how I got into this, and I like to start with a story just to let everyone know sort of what it is that that kind of pushed me to kind of engage with this very subpopulation of potentially high risk college students regarding alcohol and other drug use. Now, it'd be easy to say that this has to do with my brush with the law during college, or my personal experiences with substance use, or even something that directly happened to me, in which if I shared any of that, you would probably question how I even got to become an assistant professor. But that being said, that's not necessarily why I got into this research, or why I have a passion for this necessarily. It's more about it centers around two people that I have loved and that I have lost since I've learned to understand, what it is to be an adult and what it is to be responsible and do my own, be on my own kind of thing. It has little to do with me more so than how I feel, and more to do with why couldn't I help two people that I loved um, stay with me. So my why is around love and family, and it's just a brief, and it's very anecdotal, so I understand it's not going to be relatable to everyone, but this is my why. And it revolves around when I was 18, 19 years old, started dating someone for 2.5 years. And around the time we both turned 21, we started to frequently attend bars and do what a majority of college students often do. She would drink a lot more than I would, but I didn't attribute that to anything more so than just, you know, 19-year, 20-year-old, that's what happens. Um, I started to student teach at one point, and as she was shutting down the bars on the weekends, it started to turn into weekdays, and it started to turn into a little more of like, is this in my head, and not knowing enough about alcohol disorder and substance disorder, is this something that happens often? Or was it something that just happened? I mean, how can someone drink so much, and why is it progressing from being Thursday, Saturday to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday? Um, I was called upon to pick her up from a bar on a Tuesday night. And I was upset because I had started student teaching. It was 7, 8 in the morning that I had to go to work. And I gave her the judgment, like, you should just drive yourself home. I'm not going. I'm upset, knowing full well that she had engaged in a lot of heavy drinking. That was the last time I spoke to her, as she unfortunately drove the wrong way on a one way and crashed and died. And the other story that I have that really kind of impacted why I do what I do is I had a family member, and a little more context is my dad's a twin. So in essence, I had a cousin with, I have a cousin in my family who was on my dad's side, and we were really close. We were born a week apart. We celebrated every birthday together, 15, 16, 17, 18. We were really, really close. We went to different colleges. And then I came back, and I found out that he started to engage in even heavier drinking and other drug use. It led to a potential substance use disorder and a meth addiction. And now I no longer have him. And in essence, that he's in prison for the next presumably 20 to 30 years. And again, I know this is anecdotal, but this is my why. And it kind of has me asking these lingering questions: is what's so different between them and me? What changed or what didn't change within their environment and even within my environment? What didn't I catch that I maybe could have caught, or maybe had been more aware? And how can we catch it now? And so this is my why, and this is why I do what I do. And so as we kind of go through this, just I wanted to help you understand that I study this with a passion, because I understand these sort of vulnerabilities that this college student populations tend to thrive and be in. So moving forward, this is, pretty generic information that we can find easily somewhere else. College students today have greater access to alcohol and other drugs than those in previous decades, whether it's availability or policy. It's presumably around more often. Thus, we're exposed to it and participate in it pretty often. The prevalence and popularity, again, continue to be alcohol and cannabis. They remain the most popular substances with college students. And more so recently, it's been something that's happened, but polysubstance use is rising among college students, specifically among those who actively engage in heavy single substance use. So anywhere between a fifth to a third of college students actively engage in polysubstance use, primarily with alcohol and one other substance. Here we have data from Modern in the Future, which I often cite. This is the most recent data. So alcohol and cannabis, we're looking at 80% annually for alcohol, 40 for cannabis. And you see the trends from there: 62 past month, 22 past month, and then so on and so forth. So I guess the thing is, we know that this is happening. We're in this business. We're aware. We live in college cities. We live in regular cities. It's around us, and it's happening often. So so what? We got to kind of nail down like why people should care, and not so. And it's we all care about it, but how can we send the message of actively investing resources into addressing alcohol and drug use on campus? So at the university level, we're looking at poor academic achievement from the student. We're looking at some financial hardships from the university if they're ever potentially sued, and or there's property damage that happens as a result of someone engaging in alcohol and drug use, and then of course doing something unfortunate. There's more incidences of sexual coercion, unwanted sexual activity, and then there's higher cases of violence on campus, whether that be from the person who is actively drinking, or if they were a victim of violence for someone who was drunk and they acted on violence upon them because of their sexual orientation, their race, or their religious differences. On the individual, we're looking at higher attrition dropout. So for the person who's there on campus, academic achievement would suffer. There's also physiological and psychological health, chronic health issues, and then unfortunately, the last part would be morbidity or mortality, which we hear cases often yearly, annually, monthly of someone who perished, unfortunately, because of their relationship with alcohol and a binge drinking or high risk drinking event, whether that be through hazing and or through drunk driving. So that's the impact that I would sell generally, and let people know it's time to invest in these resources. Now, there's more to it. So when it comes to risk factors, the transition into college can act as a risk factor for increased alcohol and drug use behavior. Now, some important factors for predicting future use is past use, social norms, when do they start, their mental health, and there are, of course, a plethora of other risk factors. They're nameless. We could contribute multiple risk factors to it. But what I'm getting at here is college can act as a catalyst for increased future use, especially for those who are early onset alcohol and other drug users, and those who don't understand or misinterpret behavioral norms. And those behavioral norms differ by state, region, city, town, university. So it's important to understand these, and we're going to get more to that towards the end of the presentation. Regardless of these current behaviors that are increasing, plateauing, and or new behaviors, research indicates that these increasing rates of AOD use and mental health issues among college students are concurrently happening. Despite that, their help-seeking behaviors remain pretty low. A reference I often cite or a number I often cite is around 8 to 10% of those who suffer from an SUD or an AUD even seek help for that issue. So, and sometimes they know, sometimes they don't know, and it's our job to kind of maybe increase awareness of that. But a perpetual cycle would be alcohol and drug use. They are unaware or unconcerned about their alcohol and drug use because it's a normalized behavior for some universities, for some towns, for college students. It's largely a normalized thing that happens, not necessarily always a rite of passage, but can be viewed as such. And then the stigma associated with getting help would be, I'm 18, 19, 20. I just do this because my friends do this. Why would this be indicative of me having a problem? And why would I go seek help for this issue that I don't think is one? And even if I did think it was one, I'm too young to have an alcohol use disorder or substance use disorder. Then they're unwilling or unable to seek help, which could lead to more long-term use, and then of course physical, psychological, chronic health issues as they mature out of the college age and go into the next stage of adulthood. And what happens is we're molding those behaviors within those 18 to 24 year ranges when they're within our control and in front of us, and we teach them and we eat lunch around them and we interact with them daily. So when it comes to prevention and intervention programming, excessive alcohol and drug use among college students is compelling and has compelled universities to increase their oversight of alcohol and other drugs. This includes prevention and intervention programs, and overall health and well-being efforts. So when it comes to talking about prevention programs, I think a lot of us are familiar with some. And of course, I just use the most notorious one, which is alcohol EDU that I'm familiar with. But a lot of them tend to be electronic or web-based. And they tend to be either used as a supplement to a program or introduced during their first semester of college. I know I've been a part of a university where they were required to participate in some of these programs before they could register for a class or before they could enroll in the university, as a way to inform and bring awareness. There's alcohol EDU, the alcohol e-checkup to go. These are different programs, but I'm kind of just trying to give you a broad understanding of what these might be. And they can and have proven to be effective, but some, in my opinion, and in other research opinions, are very standardized, and they don't account for the cultural norms in their environment. So someone who's here with me at A&M, who's about to go to watch A&M play, which would be in a year, maybe University of Texas, is going to have a different environment than someone who's maybe in the Northeast, in the South, in the West, whatever cultural region that might be. And sometimes these programs can't and don't account for that. And now we're speaking more broadly as I jump into a very specific subpopulation of college students. And we're looking at those who might attend intervention programs. Now, intervention programs tend to be voluntarily counseling. I'm going to go and attend the counseling and psychological services. I'm going to University of Health and Wellness. But there's another subset where they're sort of forced to attend programs, and that's mandated programs. Every year, colleges report alcohol and drug use policies as the most common reason that students receive these discipline referrals. We're talking amongst a variety of reasons of why they can. Alcohol and drug use tends to be the top most common reason. Among college students, though, alcohol and drug use is highest among those who violate those policies. So in studies where we look at voluntarily research students, voluntary students to those who are mandated tend to out everything those who are non-mandated. And then those students tend to be mandated to an intervention program as a way to make amends for their violation, for their behaviors. Across the board, mandated students compared to voluntary students drink more frequently, have more personal problems reported, have more physical problems that they report, have increased academic difficulties, have an increase in risky behaviors, and above all, they're least likely to seek help, even though that they know that they're here because of a policy that they violated, and engage in alcohol and drug use. I assume some of us might be here because we were part of the process or we understand how this works, but let me explain it briefly. The way the process works is alcohol and drug use occurs, then they're kind of forwarded to an authoritative figure and they are reprimanded for it, or they're caught by them, right? It could be a resident advisor or a police officer at a football game, and somehow, some way, they are reprimanded, and they report to a disciplinary department. That could be code of conduct, like it is, like many places I've been, but also people have it within like student affairs. They have it within campus health and wellness. There are numerous ways that people can interact with these students, and they are referred to there. They are assigned the course and they participate in the course participation. And then the process for some can start over. So this brought to me like, why are there repeat offenders? Are we doing enough? And this is kind of where I became involved in this. And typically a lot of my data collection happens around this course assignment and course participation. Some interventions tend to be evidence-based, but some are adopted within university and they're created by employees who are staffed by them. And while I acknowledge and admire that, because that takes a lot of work, there could be some flaw in that, and there could be a better way to approach that. They can be completed online or in person, and existing research can provide a blueprint for creating programs and intervention programs. And we can talk about sources and address these things later at any point in time, actually. But there are some ways that we could go around effectively doing this as opposed to just trying to keep our head above water. My experience with this population was I was a substance youth. I dove into my PhD program pretty early in the sense of like I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't have to float around and maybe find a passion. I knew what I wanted to do. And as I became an educator for those policy violators, specifically, I was a brief motivational interventioner, and I would do interviews and kind of get to some of these root issues about why they engage. Mine was specifically with cannabis use, and I found that just the how clear and how transparent they were with this use meant that there's something that we can do, and maybe some cases we're not doing enough. So what we're about to show you, the next 4 studies are about 95% of it is published, and the other 5% is waiting to hear back about a conference. But I want to present them to you because this is stuff that I found through my dissertation that I was fully just passionate about, and I I didn't want to just collect data and graduate. I wanted to collect data and then do something with it and do something about the process. So the first one is alcohol and polysubstance behaviors of mandated college students prior to collegiate sporting events. So we're looking at assessment of pre-gaming. So the purpose of this was to assess the relationship between pre-gaming and alcohol use frequency. And I know as you read that, it's very intuitive. It's the sunrise and the sunsets. We know that they're associated, but I want to know more about that association. And more specifically, I want to know whether those who pre-game were more likely to engage in polysubstance use, means using one substance during that drinking event, using more than one substance, so alcohol plus something. Now, the methods for the next 3 studies will be similar. I collected this from my dissertation, 19 through 21. Around 816 participants said yes to being in my study. Measures include, for this study, demographics, pre-gaming, frequency of alcohol and polysubstance use, and sociocultural variables. What I found through this was within pre-gaming was significantly associated with the frequency of alcohol use among mandated students. So again, I get it. The sun rises, the sun sets. We know that if you're going to pregame, you're going to have a higher incidence of alcohol. That's understood. But what we did find was that there was about an approximate 2-day increase in the frequency of alcohol use for every unit increase in pre-gaming. That could, that's just to say that for every time one of these students said that we pre-gamed here in this month, that means that they increased their drink days by about 2 days. And that could be because maybe people are pre-gaming for sporting events. They are pre-gaming for celebrations. It tends to be not isolated incidences, but maybe tends to be more so a couple of days in which they add to drinking, knowing that they get to celebrate something. And this was focused around sporting events. So that's kind of what the main context of this was. And students who pre-gamed were 2.5 times more likely to engage in polysubstance use. And much like other studies, polysubstance use was reported around 1/5 to even up to 1/4 of the sample population. So those who pre-game are 2.5 times more likely to engage in polysubstance use. Some factors that are associated with alcohol frequency was pretty much every variable that I included. Those who were male, those who were or men, those who were affiliated with Greek life, those who were non-Hispanic white, those who were of legal drinking age, those who were polysubstance users, those who had inflated alcohol perceived norms. So in essence, they perceived more people drink than actually has been reported as those who drink. And then pre-gaming was associated with alcohol frequency. Again, the only one that's not significant here would be freshmen, which I now refer to as first-year students. But our freshmen, and they were non-significant. And there's more to that context in a future study. So now we move on to study number 2. College students mandated to substance use courses, or I specifically was passionate about looking at age of onset as a predictor of contemporary polysubstance use. And now when I talk about this, it's looking at a few things. Now let me kind of briefly explain. I'm sure age of onset is self-explanatory, but the human brain and body are highly susceptible to the consequences of excessive AOD use in adolescence and young adulthood. And I became interested in this as I started to understand cultural norms and how early and often alcohol has been normalized and introduced to my life and to other students' lives. And it became something that I was unaware until I started meeting friends who were non-Hispanic at another university, that I was like, what do you mean this? You don't do this? And this is a part of growing up. I think we all understand that But these things are where students are living this in real time. They're understanding all these different variables that happen, and it's happening in real time. These light bulb moments are like, and they're asked to make fast decisions, especially regarding alcohol and drug use. So all this is to say, I was exposed early to alcohol use, as are many others, and so I wanted to look at whether whether rates of alcohol and drug use would impact their polysubstance use. Rates of AOD use among early onset users do tend to increase over time. So the earlier you start, the more the kind of trajectory would be that you fall in a linear positive fashion, meaning that you drink more and more over time. Early onset AOD use are among the heaviest AOD users as adults also. Some consequences of early onset use include like chronic neuropsych problems, financial and legal issues, dependence and or addiction. I know we're phrasing out that word, but dependence and or disorder, an increase in delinquent behavior, and then the decrease in inhibitory control and attention span. And almost all of these are common DSM criteria for an alcohol use disorder or for a substance use disorder. So I wanted to take this and look at it specifically within the college student population. And the purpose was to determine predictors of mandated college students' alcohol use frequency and the likelihood of early onset alcohol users engaging in concurrent modern polysubstance use. So again, the same sample was the same students, 822, same framing period. And we included demographics, when they started using, frequency and quantity of alcohol use, and concurrent polysubstance use. I don't include any of the demographics on here, but the age of onset was around 16 and a half years old. So you could see that that would be, in my opinion, an age of onset of that early, and some reporting even as young as 14 would be something that interested me and why I did this. So again, this paper has been published. You can go and read it and look at more of those demographics. But the mandated college student alcohol use frequency was positively associated with and significantly predicted by early onset use, being male, men, having a Greek life affiliation, being of a white non-Hispanic racial background, and having inflated alcohol perceived norms. Now, for concurrent polysubstance use was reported among 1/5 of the sample population. Again, that refers back to the same study number one. Mandated college students who engage in concurrent polysubstance use were more likely to be early onset users. We're looking at odds ratio of they're twice as likely. Affiliated with the Greek Cannabis organization about 1.5 times, and have inflated perceived norms of alcohol norms for alcohol use, so about 1.25. They were less likely to be freshmen. Now, there are a lot of implications within these studies, and I address them all in the final section. In this case, I want to just kind of get them all out there, and then we'll talk about implications in a lump sum. Now, regarding freshman first year classification, it kind of intrigued me because that's when people are first exposed to a lot of this, and maybe trying to understand and decipher what direction they're going to go in. Freshman students were almost 40% less likely to engage in concurrent polysubstance use. And it did not predict alcohol frequency among mandated students in our study. Not in study 2 or study 1 that we looked at. Historically, this goes back to sort of those prevention programs. Universities do implement AOD programs prior to or during students' first year of college. Now, my hypothesis, and not even hypothesis, been proven before, that there's a potential impact on programming incorporated during orientations and introductory courses. And in other words, having those prevention programs early could in fact delay the onset of use and delay future use. And there's also research that backs, those who have abstained more are more also likely to abstain in the future. So there's plenty of things to understand why first year students are less likely to engage in concurrent polysubstance use, and maybe not predict frequency among the mandated student population. So this is one of my favorite studies, was study number 3. How do mandated college student drinkers characterize binge drinking? And Adam Berry is my department head here. He's also my mentor. So he's kind of one of the reasons that I decided to come to A&M. So this is one of my favorite studies because I'm not, I wouldn't say obsessed. I'd like to know how people perceive and maybe potential mischaracterizations. Now we know that binge drinking traditionally occurs when a person consumes an excessive amount of alcohol in a short time frame. So we're looking at 5 or more drinks in 2 hours or less for men, and 4 or more drinks in 2 hours or less for women, as stipulated by NIAAA. Maybe 2 decades ago or something like that. So these are standardized parameters. And so I wanted to understand, do you know what these parameters are? So the purpose was to explore differences in mandated student characterization of binge drinking and to understand if overestimating what binge drinking is actually leads to increased alcohol use. And so I had to kind of put a lot more work into this one. Data collected anonymously from the students, and we specifically look at alcohol use, quantity, and frequency, binge drinking characterization. By that, I mean, how do they define binge drinking in their own terms, quantity, numbers wise, and then binge drinking behavior. What we found was the average magnitude in the difference between personal parameters and national standards. So what they understand to be and what it actually is was 5 drinks for men and 4 drinks for women. So not saying that they estimated it's 5 and 4, but more so that they estimated it's double what the actual rates are. So men looked at around 10 drinks, and women said, binge drinking is more around 8 drinks for women. So as we look at this, they are perceiving that binge drinking to be twice the national standard of what it is. And they also binge drink more frequently. So those who overestimated it binge drink more frequently. So we're looking at specifically what is it within that, what can we attribute to that overestimation, and more so like what happens as a result of them overestimating by nearly double what binge drinking actually is. So in the past 30 days, binge drinking was approximately 1.5 times more likely among men, 2 times more likely among Greek affiliated students, Greek organizations, and over 3 times more likely among those who overestimated what constitutes binge drinking. So I didn't say in this case, let's take the full binge drinking. We were able to parse out that overestimation, that average of 5, the average of 4, and we made that the overestimate. We didn't say it's 10 drinks and 8 drinks as a variable. We said we're just going to take the overestimate part and say, does this actually do it? If we would incorporate the full variable, it might have been more. So in this case, we found that those who overestimated were 3 times more likely among those who to binge drink. So I presented this at APHA a couple of weeks ago. Misperceptions may lead mandated students to believe that their personal alcohol use aligns with or is below what qualifies as binge drinking and is therefore not problematic or hazardous. My students and I talk about this a lot, and most of my students are pre-med, pre-pharm, pre-nursing, and they tend to understand what binge drinking, but one of my favorite questions to ask them is, do you know what those numbers are? We're in the health field. And if those in the health field can't always characterize what it is, how do we expect the 90% of students in universities who are not in the health field to understand what binge drinking is, other than binge means a lot of something? So that was this is one of my favorite studies that came out of this. And I continue to look at perceptions of something like this because if it's more normalized, we know that people are more likely to engage in it, especially when it's not labeled, as something as so hazardous as binge drinking. Now we want to cannabis use, and we look at risk factors for quantity of cannabis use per day among college students who violated the university drug use policy. So I shifted away from frequency because we can report using cannabis once every day for 30 days. But if we're using micro amounts, while it constitutes as a problem, I think a more interesting concept was looking at the quantity of use specifically. So the purpose was to assess risk factors and reasons for cannabis use among students who violated the policy. At this place where I took the data, they had separate courses for alcohol and separate courses for cannabis. So I looked at the 99 cannabis using students, specifically who were in cannabis programs and who violated a 0 tolerance policy for cannabis use, whereas the alcohol had a different policy, which was it's allowed, but not in dorms. And, there's just a little more, it was basically 0 tolerance for cannabis, and there's some leeway for alcohol use. Measures included demographics, behaviors, and beliefs, as well as reasons and risk factors for cannabis use. So some reasons that they were reported for using is to relax or relieve tension. 3/4 of them reported that. 2/3 said to feel good or get high. And none of these items that I say they were coping. Coping was an entire different category of the list of multiple reasons why. And coping didn't make a top 10. Now, there are some covariates. So yeah, there's a lot of layered versions here. But in this sense, looking at this, these students are reporting use in a very recreational sense, which maybe dispels a lot of the reason that we think or thought people use cannabis was as a way to cope. That is a deal. It was ranked somewhere in the 40 to 50%, but it seems that they're doing this because they want to. Now we can take this same, and just because they want to feel good, they want to feel the effects. We can take the same data and put it with the recreational users that are not mandated. And I don't know what we would find. My guess is it might be relatively close. And to have a good time, to have a good time with friends. The least common reason for use was because they felt hooked or that they felt dependent on it, which is around 5%. And this is alarming because anywhere between 30 to 40% of active cannabis users could potentially be diagnosed as having a disorder. And that might be a little underreporting. It's just more so what I kind of cite, just to say a little more on the conservative side. The average age of first regular cannabis use was 16.8 years old. About 64% reported regular use before the age of 18, regular meaning 1 or 2 times a week. Students perceived an average of 47% of their peers had used cannabis in the past month. And this is almost, by peers meaning at the university, this is almost double the prevalence of actual past 30-day cannabis use among students. They report an average perceived risk of regular cannabis use of slight risk. So saying if others engage in 1 or 2 times a week, that's just slight risk. I don't really see an issue with that. And more than half of the students said there was no risk associated with regular cannabis use. Using 1 or 2 times a week, every week, I don't think that's an issue. These are the findings reported, not personal perceptions. And on average, they looked at around, they average around 7 days a month, which this could look at the spectrum of the inherent issue with mandated programs is while majority of them might be active constant users, there could be an incident where maybe one or a few of them, a handful of them, are one-time offenders and we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, but by default have to report to programming in order to get this crossed off their list. So that might be why it's skewed in such a heavy way in 10 days. I mean, that's looking at 17 days and the other end, which some people reported 0 in the past 30 days, only because their violation might have occurred prior than the past 30 days. But around 8% of participants reported daily cannabis use. Now, when we look at the risk factors for cannabis use, we're looking at those that predicted cannabis use per day. And we'll talk about this again in the next slide. But the main ones were perceived risk of cannabis use, past month frequency, and then being of a racial, ethnic, minoritized identity. So the same things are highlighted here. So higher frequency of cannabis use was associated with more per day. Lower perceived risk of cannabis use was associated with more cannabis use per day. And then being of a minoritized racial, ethnic identity was associated with more cannabis use. And this is interesting because only 1/3 of the sample was population. That means there's enough power in that 1/3 to constitute a significant finding. Despite a relatively low average quantity of cannabis use, 0.25 grams a joint maybe, 40% reported consuming more than 1 gram of cannabis per day when they used. And this next part would be the 5% of findings that haven't been necessarily published, but I'm working on a paper for this. Respondents who are in their first year of college, we had an odds ratio of 6, had higher cannabis quantity and an odds ratio of 1.6, and who co-used had an odds ratio of 5 times, and so on and so forth, to use cannabis to feel good or get high, an odds ratio of 25 times, and to cope with problems, an odds ratio of 35 times, or an increased odds of using concentrates. So I was able to parse out who in this sample used concentrates that are not smoking in terms of flower cannabis. And this is the findings that I've had, currently pending approvals for presentation. So where do we go from here is kind of where we're going to leave off in this presentation in the next 10 or so minutes. Where do we go from here? Wherever I go, I kind of take this same mold and I adjust based on what it is that these people at the university prefer. So what I'm currently looking at within the mandated student population, amongst other studies, is I want to review audit scores, alcohol use disorder, cannabis use disorder scores, help-seeking behavior, and behavioral norms. Office of the Dean of Student Life, or who are my collaborators with at here, health promotion, counseling, psych services, and even the Title IX office. We've collaborated, and I talked to many of them, but it took some time to understand these, and it's going to take you some time too. And these are the phases where we review, we assess the scope, we develop, and then I implement and evaluate a program, which is currently where we're at. I've been here for a little over 2 years, but it took a year for me to understand what these, how to navigate these relationships with university admin. So what I found was I wanted to practice what I preach. I reported audit scores amongst a sample of 320 of these students. The average score was 7. So if you're familiar with it, you're looking at 8 being a hazardous alcohol use score. What was alarming, though, was that 35% reported over 8 and 10% even had a score of 15, which indicates a risk of dependence. When it comes to cannabis use, average score was 6.5. Not necessarily alarming because 8 would indicate hazardous, but what was alarming was that 30% had a score greater than 8 and 10% had a score that's greater than 12, which indicates a risk of dependence. Among those who seek help, or those who or we asked if they ever sought help, 5% said, yeah, we have. 5% of 320, it's an extremely small amount. And we just asked, did you ever seek help specifically for substance use issues? And 5% said yes. The norms they reported, we think around 66% of our peers looked at alcohol, and 39% did use cannabis over the past month, which 66% is around what the average is nationally. And cannabis at 39 is almost, again, double how much people are actually using cannabis nationwide. I looked at their behavioral intent to engage in pre-gaming, in which 90% said yes. And tailgating, over half of them said yes. We're going to, in the next 4 years or 3 years or 2 years, how much time is left, we are going to pregame and we're going to tailgate. And drinking customs, I'm kind of interested in understanding how these local college drinking traditions and towns really kind of shape their behaviors. And so I asked here at A&M of these students, are you aware of any drinking customs? Now, you've seen, heard, whatever it is, I'll let you kind of decide what that means. But basically I asked, are you aware of drinking traditions that happen here? Now, other universities have every university, not every, I would say most universities, many have drinking traditions that maybe we don't understand as faculty and staff, but maybe they do because they're living and breathing these traditions. I said, are you aware? And 68% yes. And then I said, follow up, can you name what those traditions are? And I'm going to just say, be careful asking this question because the things you read, it's a qualitative question, are alarming and don't make any sense to someone who's looking at this from a researcher perspective. So there might be some room for more qualitative and explicit, very detailed data, but this was alarming to read to see what's happening. I said, okay, you name them. Do you intend to do the things that you listed above? In which case 86% said, yeah, we do. So here's the implications. We know we have their beliefs, we have their intents, we have their customs, we know what they're doing. For the most part, if you've done this study like this, or if you intend to do studies, I go back to what a graduate student said in 2016 when I first started. We're swimming in data. We got to know what to do with it. And so partnerships need to be established. There's got to be collabs among research faculty, local authorities, university orgs, and even vendors. Researchers reach out and ask practitioners who work in health and wellness, who work in campus rec, whatever the case is, health services, counseling services. And practitioners, you're not off the hook either. I understand, and we understand at this point specifically, we are overworked and understaffed. But reach out and ask for help because there are people who are on campuses or people who are on other campuses who want to do this work, who want to help, but we're creatures of habit. So if it's going to take something extra to do, it's going to throw us off what we normally do. We got to learn to be uncomfortable and be comfortable with being uncomfortable and kind of treading above water sometimes, but we're trying to change the narrative of what we've done or what's happening. Promote safer alcohol consumption within university orgs for those over 21, seeking to responsibly minimize alcohol-related consequences. Provide spaces with student services for students to socialize, communicate concerns, especially those who are maybe sober and or are in recovery related to alcohol use that's free from the pressures of those who use it. Promote voluntary counseling services on campus for those who use substances and fear being reprimanded. raise awareness among the university admin, and encourage funds to be allocated to university and local programs. Bottom line is they will pay money to keep butts in seats, but you need the data to tell them, look, we have 30% of our students have an audit score of over 8. We are at risk of losing these students. Within health and wellness, assess the scope and severity of alcohol and drug use among students who attend these programs on campus, as well as get risk factors, knowledge, and needs. Essentially, conduct a baseline assessment because data needs to be collected in order for us to prove we should invest some more time and money in this. Policy, establish and enforce risk management policies on college campuses, especially within the sports venues and tailgating areas, and places with rich sports culture. Work with student conduct office, encourage or obligate referrals to campus or community-based counseling. Now, this is a gray area, and I completely understand that. What I want more so is to tailor programming based on severity, risk factors, and behavior. So provide students with programming, but give those high-risk students an opportunity to go elsewhere if they want, and let them know, hey, potentially you have a score of 8, 10, 12 in whatever screening assessment that we use, and create the sort of tertiary secondary program where you can't maybe mandate them, but at least give them resources. If my undergrad students can produce a secondary and tertiary referral program, I think we can also. Content, establish a clear understanding of alcohol and cannabis definitions, parameters, eliminate the ambiguity associated with personal and pure alcohol or cannabis use, correct their misperceived social norms and risk perceptions. You're going to have to do your work with cannabis use policies and trends because it's here, it's not going nowhere, it's not going anywhere, and it's different amongst the 50 states, regions, everywhere it's different, and it's super confusing for these students who come into a university when they come from a state that maybe allowed it to a university that doesn't allow it because of federal regulations. Leverage predictive factors of alcohol and polysubstance use into programming. Tailor interventions to focus on racial, ethnic, cultural factors that's associated with use. Even looking at high-risk students, Greek orgs, corps, sports teams, whatever it is, both mandated and non-mandated. Provide alternative stretch management and recreational strategies. Work with Campus Rec. They are happy to be a part of this. They're always looking for programming. Educate students to recognize signs of SUD by implementing standard screening tools, and keep the ethics of the students incorporated. If we identify someone who is at high risk, we should ask ourselves, what are our ethical responsibilities to help that student? In which case, there's a lot that needs to be conducted with that sort of research. In terms of duration, delivery, and modality, alcohol and polysubstance use provided during freshman year should be supplemented, in my opinion, with follow-up sessions to help sustain long-term change yearly. Provide some follow-up things. These students don't need to have a one-shot approach to something that impacts them every day, every week for the next 4 to 5 years. One time as a freshman or first year doesn't mitigate all the pressures that they'll experience over the next 4 years. Additionally, the use of online and face-to-face interventions may help support this long-term effectiveness when addressed to the right audience. Let's, again, tailor the messages to maybe low risk and high risk people. Low risk, you can attend those online interventions because maybe they want more general info and they're one-time offenders. But those who are at higher risk, let's tailor the message and the content to them and the modality in which we deliver this. Finally, ask the students, what are your preferences? Where would you like to go if you're referred out? Who would you like to see? Is this even acceptable? Do you think it's acceptable? Ask those questions in research. That way you understand what are some potential follow-up procedures to give to students that you're dealing with within mandated programming. And maybe we can't get to them, but at least we can put some power in their hands. And evaluate, work with student affairs, health services, look at short-term and long-term evaluation through surveys, through interviews, and see if what you're doing is working. Adapt, refine, and then do it all over again. The students keep us here. We chose to work in this field. There's a lot of work to be done in this field. So let's kind of help assist with that programming. And let's make these programs a little more effective to address the actual concerns and issues that are happening on campus. And so my closing thoughts is a university-wide approach to improving the health and wellness of students is necessarily to effectively address what's happening and support their success. We have high rates of mental health issues, high rates of polysubstance use and alcohol use. Still, we have 80% of college students who said over the past year, we've done this. That's an extreme amount. Universities are responsible for the health and wellness of the students for which they admitted to their university, and we're the employees that help them sort of achieve that. You attended this today because you kind of care about the health and wellness of students. Or, you know, kind of you explicitly do care about the health and wellness of students. We're all tired, but we can't continue to just check boxes and go on with our day-to-day things. Uh, while the trends show that things are happening in the opposite direction, we need to find a way to kind of encompass and help as many as we can, given them that we have a short amount of time. And this last closing thought is this sort of this passion that I have. Next time someone says they're just college students, let them know that maybe they're one of the fortunate ones who made it through college unharmed because they had what they needed. They had the upbringing that they had. Maybe it's a little more affluent, maybe it's a little more sheltered or non-sheltered, or maybe they just have more resilience. But there are millions of people who don't have that, who do explicitly need our help in maybe getting to the next stage of life and or just helping keep them alive and out of trouble. And that's the end of my presentation. And at this point, I'll take questions. I do want to just, since we have 10 minutes left, just kind of provide my email at here for questions, collabs, or even just to know more about the content and or talk. I love fielding emails and having presentations or discussions with people who do similar things that I do, just because it doesn't happen often. And I really enjoy this helping people. So.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Montemayor, for covering a ton of material and slides. I know folks are probably processing a little bit of the content that was shared, but now is the time for questions if you do have one. Of course, Dr. Montemayor, thank you for sharing of your contact information so folks can email you directly if they have any come in. I do have one question that did come in, and so we can get started with some questions. And it goes, have you found any prevention strategies that work best among high-risk populations, such as Greek life?
Yeah, so what the research has found, and what I not necessarily have found myself, so we're currently gathering data within these specific subpopulations, but harm reduction tends to be something that Greeks, those who are at high risk, tend to gravitate towards. Only, I would say not only, but part of it's because of the inherent things that happen within Greek life, right? If we go in there and say shame for what you're doing, it's going to, they're not going to essentially experience some sort of joy with hearing that. So we can focus on harm reduction strategies. This is what I found: brief motivational interviewing, understanding that what they're doing, they're constantly battling, listening to what messages that we send versus what their peers are telling them daily, weekly, monthly. So in essence, I found that brief motivational interviewing has worked within these mandated student populations, specifically with those who are with Greek life, because they can sit and they want to talk and they want to tell you things that they won't tell their Greek affiliated friends as well. So I'd say that we're still looking at data here. There's plenty of studies that do show it when you just with research Greek students, but in this case, we're looking at mandated students who are within the Greek life.
Thank you, Dr. Montemayor. We did have another question come in. What evidence-based interventions are there for cannabis for students who violate AOD policies?
So that's a fantastic question, and that's what got me started in this in the first place. Now, what I didn't show was I took that study as a fifth study, and I took it out of here because what started all this was essentially my passion in helping cannabis using students and trying to help them. Trying to help spread the message that we're not doing enough for a drug, a substance that's going to grow recreationally and grow in use and tends to grow and is growing. So I wrote a systematic review. I'm not trying to self-promote myself in any sense or form, more so than I'm trying to let you know that I've had the same question and I did what researchers do and I wrote a paper about it. And what we found was there are some things like brief motivational interviewing and written feedback, personalized feedback things that work for those who are high risk or cannabis using within mandated students, but we need to supplement that with booster sessions over time. Now, that being said, that had some short-term effects in reducing use, but the long-term effects were still questionable. We're looking at around 12 months to 18 months. They're kind of going back to normal behaviors. Now, this is where I come in with trying to understand what are some of those cultural things we can address. Someone who's from an indigenous community or someone who's from a minority community might benefit from understanding hey, like we kind of live and thrive in this community now where we have to maybe address some of the things that we're asking and or doing. But that being said, that's what's worked with the research, but there's not enough research, in my opinion, to justify what would be the best approach. At this point, cannabis use is outpacing cannabis research, and in which case we should do the best that we can with what we have, while also trying to innovate with our approaches to things.
Thank you again, Dr. Montemayor. I think this might be our last question. Acknowledging that students receive messaging about use of alcohol and other drugs before stepping foot on campus from their peers, family, media, etc., how do you navigate conflicting values and social norms?
So this is part of why I'm doing this. Is a fascinating question, and it's a very it sits at the deep rooted issue that I like to look at, because we're looking at someone who's coming to a campus. And let's put my example. I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with any campus, but we're asking students who come from different backgrounds, different cultures, ethnics, races, regions, everything. And they were expected them to just exist with a group of 70,000 other students here. Your university could have different numbers, but we expect them to just come here and look at different, experience different life coming in here, and then we're all expected to coexist together, and almost having them set aside what their cultural values and norms are in order to fit in if they want to fit in. Now they can find very like-minded people, but what we need to do is, in my opinion, collect information from these different regions, cultural, ethnic students, and understand what are their risk factors for alcohol and cannabis use, and how can we tailor a message to each of those cultures that then would allow them to understand, like, hey, like what you're experiencing is a normal part of college, and you're getting your values challenged from what you experienced coming up here, and that's okay. Let's put everyone together in a safe community and see how we can actually give you the right message that makes you feel comfortable. Because you're right, coming into a place where it's inherently different, because that's what colleges are, is extremely challenging for people who come from different regions, ethnics, culture, everything. So it's a hard question to answer, because I don't think we've done enough to really address those micro populations, subpopulations within universities, because that takes a lot of work. But that's also what I'm trying to do. Great question to kind of, I guess, Anthony, to end this presentation. So.
Well, just a big thank you again to you, Dr. Montemayor, for sharing of yourself and sharing of your research. I know it was of great value to our audience, and we are very excited to be able to uplift your work. I am just going to share a couple of housekeeping slides before we wrap up. Again, just a reminder of a few upcoming events that we have taking place. We have our Cannabis Symposium taking place next week. We have a December water cooler chat taking place on the 12th and is focused on health and wellness, a university and fraternity and sorority conversation. We'll have a free webinar taking place at the end of January and is focused on understanding passion for substance use among college students with and without a cannabis use disorder. And we have the 2024 national meeting taking place in Columbus at the end of July and the beginning of August. And please stay tuned, as we will be releasing the call of proposals and look forward to reviewing your session submissions in the coming weeks. And with that, today's session has been recorded, and you can expect to see it uploaded to our website within 3 business days. Additionally, we have an evaluation embedded in today's Zoom webinar that should open in your browser as you leave today's session. We would greatly appreciate your feedback on today's session, as well as future session topics. Thank you, everybody, and hope you have a great rest of your week, and hope to see you again soon. Take care, all.